Hola. I want to talk about the extremely overrated Lewis and Clark expedition, which went this way. It is extremely overrated because they were not really pioneers. They were in French and Spanish lands, not just, of course, Native American, where there were already Europeans who saw everything they saw before they did. So they're just, what did they actually do? What did they actually do? Now there's an article about how overrated they are by this magazine, online magazine. Stop celebrating. They don't matter. The US infatuation with them grows more fervent with every passing year, said this guy in 2002. 21 years ago. I am so old. But that's a good thing, because I don't want to live in this world so long, so full of bad things. But I must stay here for the sake of certain things. Now, it says here, if Lewis and Clark had died, it wouldn't have mattered a bit. And it talks about the moon landing that never occurred. If it did occur, why not leave a landmark visible from Earth? It's because they can't fake that on the real moon. In my 2 videos on how belief in aliens is stupid, I cover proof that NASA lies. And back to this. Now they call themselves the core of discovery. What did they actually discover? What did they actually discover? So Native Americans were everywhere, of course, but Lewis and Clark were not even the first Europeans. Trappers and traders had to cover the land before them. Here it says, though Lewis and Clark may have been the first whites to cross the Rockies in the United States, explorer Alexander Mackenzie had traversed the Canadian Rockies a decade before them. They did it in the 1800s. What was it, 1804 or so? 1805. So, no, they weren't the first. The Spaniard Coronado, el Conquistador, atravesó por las montañas rocosas. The Spanish crossed the Rocky Mountains way before any Brit. 1540s, man. But of course, the slate is U.S. centric, and David plots this German name. He's not going to be without prejudice against the Spanish. He was indoctrinated to belittle the Spanish. The Black Legend lives emphasis on L-I-E and lives. And yes, of course. So, as you can see, the Spanish aren't even covered. They're not even considering the Spanish, even though this was Spanish. This is Spanish North America. So if you zoom in, there's not that much resolution, but if you zoom in, you can see some more details. Here you see, hold on, I gotta zoom in some more. So all of this was Spanish. Spanish protectorate says here. San Luis. Was that a battle or a fort? Not sure. Spanish claims on Illinois and Michigan. 1700s apparently. Some battle. Eugenio. Not sure what that says. Here you have the Lakotas. I love their language. Want to learn that language. And so, all these Native Americans, the first Europeans they saw were Spaniards or the French, not the English. The English are overrated. Overrated. And over here you have Juan de Fuca. So Ioannis was either a Greek or a Slav from Greece who explored this area before the so-called pioneers, Lewis and Clark, went over there. Extremely overrated. Extremely overrated. Further on, it says that after the celebration of their safe return, they sank into obscurity, and for good reason. They failed their primary mission, which wasn't their fault because they didn't create the Earth. God did, of course. Jefferson had dispatched them to find a water route across the continent, the fabled Northwest Passage. But they discovered that water transport from coast to coast was impossible. Jefferson, chagrined, never bragged much about that expedition he had fathered. God forced people to go around America by the sea or eventually dig the Panama Canal by the Rocky Mountains. That's one of their purposes. And also the mountains extend into Central America and further. That forces people to go around. Geography determines much in history. It's very interesting. So it produced nothing useful, their expedition. And apparently Meriwether killed himself or was murdered in 1809 without writing. Not sure if that's true, but it was it. And so they had some scientific data about plants. So maybe they had some of that, but whoop-de-doo. Why do they still call them Indians? Get updated. You're centuries behind, people. So, let's see. Here you go. This is also interesting or worth noting. So, Clark told the President that they had discovered the best route across the continent. Route or routes. Most people say routes. I think route sounds better, but maybe it's not correct. Whatever, route sounds better. Across the continent, but he could hardly have been more wrong. Lewis and Clark. Why not Clark and Lewis? What is this? C comes before L, right? Oh, L first because they get an L. They take the L. Took the Missouri, whereas people in Missouri say Missouri, right? I don't know. Never been there. Through Kansas, Iowa, Nebraska, the Dakotas, and Montaña, which is a Spanish word, because the Spanish were there first, before crossing the Rockies in northern Idaho. The route was way too far north to be practical. Who could follow it? And the reason that the trail remained scenic and unspoiled is that it was so useless for economic purposes besides tourism. And so, there you go. What else do they say here? So they say that it's U.S. mythology because it's multicultural, and they discovered Eden, and they befriended the natives, and they invented the West, the glorious West, cowboys and stuff. But it was more about paving the way for genocide. You know, the Spanish were there first, but if the Spanish committed genocide, why were there so many Native Americans for these Brits to find? Because the Spanish didn't commit genocide, nor did smallpox have such a big effect on them. Smallpox is overrated. If smallpox were such a huge factor, then the Spanish with Hernan Cortes in the 1500s couldn't have allied with them because they would be dead allying with the smallpox carriers. But no, they allied with them, and they were perfectly healthy to fight and win the war against the Aztecs. Smallpox is overrated. Anyway, so what else do we got here? Here you can see their trail. They went this way through the Dakotas land, where they had a lot of trouble because the Dakotas had a little empire going on, and then they eventually reached the Pacific Ocean. Let's see. So no U.S. exploration party is more famous than that one, even though they were overrated and didn't really do much of worth. Well, there was a black slave with one of them, so he was interesting, but that doesn't change much. What else we got here? So Toussaint Charbonneau was a French and Native American mixed guy. He helped them, so he was there before them. He was in some of the places, and his wife was Sacagawea. There's a song that says, "Without Sacagawea, Clark would still be in Duluth. Without you with me, baby, I'd be nothing, nothing, that's the truth." That's from Hey Arnold. So Lewis and Clark are promoted by cartoons. Kids are taught to idolize them as heroes or something. What did they accomplish? So this was the Spanish realm from 1762 to 1800. The Spanish were in some places prior to this date. You had to be really stupid to believe that they never used Spanish knowledge. They weren't pioneers. The Villa Sur expedition of 1720. Remember the timing of the Lewis and Clark expedition? That was 1800s. But the Villa Sur expedition was a Spanish military expedition which failed. They went to the north. They reached Nebraska. Let me see. There's no map here. They reached. Where am I? They reached Nebraska. So the Spanish were in Nebraska before the British were there, and Kansas. So what's that story of we're not in Kansas anymore? You know, the Spanish were in Kansas before the English. The first European language heard here was probably Spanish. If not, it was French. And the Spanish were in Nebraska before the English. You guys are overrated. Again, Montana is from montaña, meaning mountain in Spanish. California is Spanish first. Oregon comes from the Spanish name Obregón. The Spanish one has a B here, though. But if you say Obregón in English, if you want to imitate that, you don't really use the B. You can easily omit that because they can't capture Spanish sounds as well. The Spanish were here. Spanish were here. Yep, Spanish were also here. But we're focusing more on this part of the world. And I mentioned Juan de Fuca, didn't I? It says he was a Greek pilot who served Felipe II of Spain. Not necessarily Greek, maybe he was a Slav. So he went to that place near Vancouver, or by Vancouver, around here. So the Spanish were there. Hold on, let me see, where is this? The Spanish were here before before these so-called pioneers. Spanish were here. The French were here. The Spanish were more to the south. But maybe there were Spaniards here no one knows about. Not everyone is remembered. Not everyone gets publication. Hundreds of years, Spanish were here. While these guys were crawling and genociding their way this way. So glad I'm not British.